experts, energy companies, investors, government officials, academics, and NGOs from Brics countries and other African countries, including South Africa. This event will provide a platform for debate, innovation, and action, with an opportunity for decision makers, investors, and developers to network and move energy projects forward. Of particular focus across all aspects of the event will be the objective of sharing lessons, ideas, and key drivers of the energy transition between the Brics countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Today's proceedings will consist of plenary addresses, 3 panel discussions designed at unfolding the purpose of the day and developing and sharing knowledge around Energy Transition 4.0. The event will culminate in a networking cocktail event with more awesome entertainment to which you are all invited. On the program, you will see that one of the plenary addresses was supposed to be the opening address from the Minister Khadebe, Department of Energy, South Africa. Minister Khadebe, unfortunately, has many commitments for the Brics Week, and he will join us when he is available. So to move the proceedings of today's event forward, I want to invite Mr. Stavros Nicolaou, Senior Executive, Strategic Trade, Aspen Pharmacare Group, to officially welcome you to the event on behalf of the South African Brics Business Council.
Thank you, Program Director. I'm not going to ask for applause like the previous speaker. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we have a protocol in South Africa that says I'm observing all protocol. So what that means is that I'm respecting the entire audience, and at the risk of leaving anybody out, I'm going to just respect protocol. So you're all most welcome to this event, and very pleased to host you at the IDC today as a South African chapter of the Brics Business Council. So you might be wondering why a pharmaceutical guy speaking at an energy conference. But it's a very simple response that I'll give to that. And I'm in fact one of the 5 Brics Business Council members, and I'm standing in for a colleague of mine, Sia Gama, who unfortunately had a family bereavement and cannot be here with us today. So I'm going to try and fill in for Sia, and the purpose of my very short input into this energy summit is really to discuss the modus operandi of the Brics Business Council and how the energy working group and the working streams that are preoccupied with energy and energy industry 4.0, green energy, green economy, etc., how this forum can interface with the council in achieving some of its objectives. So let me start off with just delineating how the council is constituted. The Brics Business Council is a 5-a-side council, so it's a 25-member council, and each of the members of the council are appointed respectively by the heads of state. The council is newly established in that it's only been around for 5 years, so it was established in 2013 in South Africa. So you could say we've done a full cycle. We've done a 5-year cycle with the Brics Business Council. The main objective of the council and its main purpose is a very simple one. It's to facilitate and enhance trade and investment amongst the 5 Brics nations, and also to use the Brics formation to attempt to unlock economic, commercial, trade and investment opportunities both within the Brics formation and also outside the formation. To give expression to the work that the council is doing, it's also important to understand that the council was established because of inputs that business people like yourselves gave to our respective governments. So in 2012, when we were discussing across the 5 countries. What is the best way for business people to accelerate business and trade opportunities amongst themselves? There was a feeling that we might be better served to have business people speaking to each other rather than having officials speaking to business people. So that was the idea behind the formation of the council, and I'm pleased to say that in the 5 years of our existence, I think we've made significant progress. As I was saying, to give expression to the work that the council is doing, we felt it best, in consultation with our respective governments, we felt it best that we establish what was initially 4 working groups, that then grew to 6, to 8, and now we are sitting with the 9th working group, which is the digital economy one, which is a very important one for particularly this audience, but just generally in terms of where our economies are going. So I'm not going to cover all 9 working streams. I think they are clearly outlined, and the work that they've done in the preceding 12 months clearly outlined in a report which will become available at the end of Thursday, and I'll cover the report in a moment. Suffice to say, however, that one of the key working streams in the Brics Business Council is that of energy and the green economy. Very important, because our economies across the 5 countries are all economies that require high growth levels. And without energy and without finding solutions around energy, you quite simply cannot grow our economies, or any economy for that matter, at the desired levels that we need to. So that particular working group, which incidentally is headed up by my colleague Brian Dahms, who will be addressing you this morning, is a very important and critical working stream within the Brics Business Council. And I'd like, when you engage today, I'd like you to keep that uppermost in your minds, because energy does cross-cut across every single one of the other 9 working streams. To give you a flavor, some of the other 9 working streams include financial services, manufacturing, and infrastructure. I'm not going to go through all of them. But the one that really holds everything together, in my opinion, is the one around energy. If we don't have energy efficiency, green efficiency, we're not going to grow our economies and achieve the objectives that, as a Brics business formation, we aim to achieve. Let me also, in ending off, let me give you a sense of the deliberations and some of the conversations that were held in Durban over the last 2 days. Many of you will know that the Brics Business Council has its annual meeting once a year at the location of the country that hosts Brics or chairs Brics for the ensuing 12 months. So South Africa is now taking chairmanship of Brics for the next 12 months. So logically, the Brics Business Council had its annual meeting here. It was held in Durban over Sunday and Monday. And we will also have a midterm meeting in about February, also be held in South Africa. And the purpose of having a midterm meeting is so that we are performance and results driven. So we can review the objectives that we set on Sunday and Monday. We can review those objectives and see how we are progressing against achieving those objectives. So there is a strong element of follow through and performance management, and also delivery with the respective projects that we outline. On Sunday and yesterday, we had a number of meetings. Firstly, each of the 9 working groups met, and each of the 9 finalized their reports. Very important, the reports, because the reports make up the bulk of the overall Brics Business Council report that the Council will be presenting to the 5 heads of state the 5 Brics heads of state on Thursday. So on Thursday, we will officially hand over the report, and included in that report will be the Green Economy Energy Working Group report as well. So from Thursday evening, that report, including the overall report of the Brics Business Council for the preceding 12 months, will become available. That report is a very lengthy report, and we don't really as a council sit and look at the length of these things. I think what is important is that we lift out from those reports the key areas that are going to drive economic growth, employment, and investment opportunities within our economy. So while I'm talking about investment, it would be remiss of me as a South African not to cover one or two things around our economy and our investment drive. And as I speak, I notice one of our president's investment envoys, Mr. Jacko Marie, he's at the back of the hall. So Jacko, just to acknowledge your presence here today. Our investment drive in South Africa, we've set a target of $100 billion of investment. That's foreign and domestic investment. And it's not an artificial target that we've set. It's a target that I think is empirically informed, and a target that I think is measurable. And we will measure it as a country at various intervals to see how we're tracking against this $100 billion target. But what I can tell you is Brics is fundamental to us achieving that target. But it's not just about South Africa. It's about how do we unlock mutual investment opportunities. And that's what I'd like to encourage this audience to preoccupy itself with, is how do we, in your particular space that you operate in, how do we unlock those investment opportunities? I say this also because geopolitically, the world is changing. If I have a look at developments geopolitically in the last 6 months, in fact, I should just focus on the last 6 weeks, actually. We're starting to see the emergence of new alliances globally, partly led by trade wars or the threat of trade wars, and I'm not sure where that all goes to. But as a Brics formation, and certainly as a Brics Business Council, very important that I convey our position here is that we do not support unilateralism. We do not support the constriction of international trading, global trading rules. I think what we support is a participative, inclusive environment to unlock both domestic and offshore investment and trade opportunities. So I think as a council, that's what we support. And I think the formation of Brics, it's been questioned very often by the West and by other business formations globally and other trade formations and blocks. But I think what I can safely say as I stand here before you is the trade and investment numbers within Brics, if you look at it at an intra-Brics level, the numbers have grown materially. And in the last 5 years, more than 100% growth. So all I can say as I end off is the numbers don't lie and the numbers speak for themselves. And I think in this environment where we are starting to see the emergence of new geopolitical and geostrategic alliances, I think it's very important that as a grouping here, we seize these opportunities, and we seize, particularly in your space, the opportunities that will lend themselves to economic growth, job creation, and of course, investment bilaterally and multilaterally within the Brics formation. So I think, colleagues, all that's left for me is just to thank you and thank the organizers for inviting the Brics Business Council to speak to you today. There are other colleagues of mine in the audience. like Selo Rasetaba, he's sitting right in front here. Selo, let me acknowledge you. So there are other council members here today, and I'm sure they'll gladly answer any further questions you might have. But just from my side, welcome to South Africa. Welcome to the IDC. You've heard many times in the past few days, those of you that have been here since Saturday, South Africa is open for business. South Africa is a progressive economy. We look forward to partnering you, and we look forward, above all, to partnerships unlocking global opportunities. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nicolau. In just reflecting on some of the issues that characterize the energy systems as we know them today, there are strong issues of unprecedented transition driven by factors inside and outside the energy system. And it has become very challenging for government and business to anticipate the energy future. What will be required to thrive as nations and entities within these changing environments? Governments and business are talking about change and reform while talking about the triple goals of access, security, growth, and sustainability. And as a context, in terms of shaping today's discussions, the program has been designed around unfolding key questions that will explore the extent of some of these challenges and some of these transitionary questions that need to be answered. But to kick off today's proceedings, I would like to ask Mr. Damas, Brian Damas, to join us and provide us with the plenary address. Mr. Damas is currently the Chief Executive Officer of African Rainbow Energy and Power and the former Chief Executive of Eskom. At the moment, he is the Chairman of the Energy and Green Energy Working Group of the Brics Business Council.
Thank you, Kiran. Good morning, everybody. A special acknowledgement to the members of the Brics Business Council of South Africa that's here, and also to our colleagues from other Brics countries. I know many of you have hoped to see the Minister of Energy here, but the Minister is engaged, and we also, as South Africa, hosting the state visit from China in South Africa at this time. I'd like to just kick off, and I'm going to talk about two aspects. One is my views around the energy transition globally and some of the things that we will see within South Africa, and then secondly, give you a sense of the things that we're focusing on within the Energy and Green Economy Work Group. Before I kick off, let me just express a huge amount of gratitude from everybody that answered my phone calls. And those are the sponsors that has been able to make this event possible, and we will thank them throughout the day. But really, from my side, thank you for supporting us. Also, a special thank you to EE Publishers for them arranging this, and then the IDC for hosting us and being an absolute great support, as well as getting us to applaud them. I know one of my co-chairs are here, and Pedro and Pedro, I don't know if you want to stand and let's give him a good welcome. Brazil didn't win the World Cup, but Pedro is here. And Pedro and I has got a long history. He works at Eletrobras, the utility in Brazil. And we used to talk about doing some wonderful things on the Southern African continent in joint investment, and we're still going to do that. So Pedro is here from Eletrobras. He chairs the chapter for Brazil. Let me then dig into my views around an energy transition. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Energy Work Group. And I think that gives us a good segue for the rest of the discussions throughout the day. An energy transition is a change in global, in regional, and in local energy mix. That is the overall combination of energy sources used over time. And history tells us that abrupt and radical changes are generally quite rare. The driving force in earlier transitions was the shift to more useful energy sources, that is from wood to coal, where we had higher energy densities and better functionality at lower cost. The prior global energy transition from biomass to coal and coal to oil and to natural gas have taken decades. And recently, the advances in energy technology, which Pedro and I were talking about the other day, this is the most dramatic change in energy since the days we decided to opt for alternating current or direct current. And these advances in technology can follow a trajectory unlike what we have seen in the semiconductor industry. It is most probably impractical to expect that the energy transition will be at that pace as what we've seen in PCs and IT technology. Because the energy infrastructure is capital intensive and it does spans decades. The primary force for this transition that we're all going through is the push for the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that results from the burning of coal. Governments and private companies and financial institutions and universities making huge investments in new technologies and in policies to accelerate this transition. But if history is a good signpost, then this transition will take decades, not just years. Today, fossil fuels provide over 85% of the world's energy supply. And despite the growth in renewables, which is significant, and has been significant since 2000, and by 2015, the new additions in renewables outstrip the new additions in fossil fuels, the total share of fossil fuel in the energy mix has remained relatively constant. Though the share of natural gas is clearly on the rise and the share of coal is clearly on the decline. That change is driven by several factors. Firstly, the stunning growth in shale gas production in the US has led to cheaper gas and abundant gas, and that has supplanted coal even in the US, even if some presidents want it back. And global greenhouse gas emissions has also played a role, particularly driving the deployment of renewables. Other key factors, certainly, that drives this change is the need to improve air quality, particularly in countries like China and India, both Brics countries. And that has led to a move away from coal towards gas and renewables and power generation, and a growth of liquefied natural gas trade that we see today around the world, bringing new supplies of gas from all over the world, from the US now as well, into Asian markets. And this, for us as BRICS countries, are quite significant because what we find is that BRICS countries today are actually leading this energy transition. Fueled by economic growth and the desire for mobility in emerging economies, oil consumption is reaching new peaks. With a robust global economy, growth in world oil demand should remain strong, certainly for the next 10 years, and to this end should moderate thereafter. Electrical vehicle sales, as we know, are growing, 45% growth in 2017, grossing a mark of 1 million, while the total light vehicle sales grew a mere 1%. But the global electrical vehicle fleet still stands at 2.8 million as opposed to 1.3 billion of oil-powered light vehicles. So electrical vehicles comprise 0.2% of light vehicles in the world and have almost no real impact on the demand of oil to date. But this is certainly set to change. So if electrical vehicles is estimated to displace 50,000 barrels of oil a day in 2017, That's a rounding error compared to global oil production daily of 100 million barrels a day. But these new models of mobility, the way people are changing their lifestyle and the way they travel, the need for autonomous vehicles are all poised to revolutionize the automotive industry. It is too soon, however, to say how exactly the technology changes will affect particularly oil demand. The rapid decline in the cost of renewables and the commensurate growth in the deployment of renewables globally has certainly seen renewables expanding rapidly. And as I said, by 2015, the additions of new renewables globally for the first time exceeded that of fossil fuels. But you know that the rate at which renewables are expanding is still slower than when the world had growth spurts of fossil fuels, both coal and oil. Coal remains a dominant fuel globally for power generation with a share of over 40%. And certainly, as we know that the additions of new coal plants globally have slowed, many existing plants remain operational and mostly will be the case for some time. And a lot of research has happened around carbon capture, use and sequestration for greenhouse gases. I have not seen any of those that has been developed viably at scale without significant policy intervention. So from our perspective, history has showed us that the global energy system are evolving. This is an evolution. This is not necessarily a revolution. So out of all of this uncertainty, the question is, what are some of the key patterns we can expect going forward? And I'd like to offer but a few. First, that the century-long process of electrification is likely to continue and is likely to accelerate. Things are becoming a lot more electric. Moving energy by wires is hugely advantageous when flexibility and cleanliness are at the premium, particularly in our massively expanding cities around the world. Pressure for decarbonization is likely to accelerate electrification since the ability to generate power with little or no carbon has become competitive. Today, approximately 19% of the final energy is electricity, and some studies says that the world will double that by 2050, and at the same time see massive decarbonization. The second trend I'd like to offer is that the growth in energy demand is likely to slow. And that is likely to slow as economies change structure. We have seen that in our very same country, as economies becoming a lot more efficient, and we've seen that globally, and as economic growth generally around the world moderates. There are countries and regions where energy demand, primary energy demand, will continue to grow, such as in India, but it's likely, and I mention India because the Chinese economy has gone through something very similar than South Africa, that up until about 2017, Chinese electricity demand and growth has outstripped their massive GDP growth. And then it suddenly came to an end and a stop, and it dropped to zero. It's exactly what happened in South Africa as the economy structure has changed. But in India, we do see higher growth in demand globally. And that's driven by energy-intensive industries. But between 1965, when I was born, and 1975, global demand has grew on average 4.5% per year. Since 2007, global demand has just averaged 1.8%. And so it's very clear that certainly going forward, that we'll see a moderate demand growth in electricity. And that really depends on how we build and structure our economies. The third pattern I'd like to offer is that coal faces significant problems globally. Some niches for growth are possible, but the overall view and outlook is that the industry is on the brink of flattening demand and, for that matter, contraction. Oil continues to occupy invaluable roles in transport and petroleum chemical sectors, and it is plausible to see that total oil demand for liquids will at some stage plateau, and the prediction is that will happen over the next 10 to 20 years. The one wild card in all of this is gas. Gas is a big wild card, and particularly the use of gas in electric power. With the right technologies and with the right policies, total demand for gas could grow substantially, particularly as it complements renewables. Without them, markets that are seeking deep cuts of emissions will squeeze conventional natural gas into the system, and technology then becomes absolutely key in deciding whether or not gas becomes the transitional fuel as the move will from the old fossil fuels into a new system. The last pattern I'd like to offer is that decentralized energy systems is underway. The energy system is being decentralized. In particular, the rise of customers themselves, and locally generated power. Today, it's more than viable that we have energy solar panels on all of our roof, on our buildings and offices and our mines. This possibility, which is spoken about more than it's observed, is most striking in the way that rural, low-income populations obtain electricity. And approximately, as we know, 1.2 billion people still have a lack of access to electricity globally, and that remains stubbornly high. And in this continent, that is more than half of those people are in Africa. So perhaps the way for the world to deal with giving people access to productive energy is through decentralized microgrids, solar power generators, rather than the continued extension of grid electricity. So the system, that is the electricity system, is certainly on the cusp of radical transformation. And it's also one that is very difficult to forecast. And the difficulty in forecasting this is largely in part because of the electricity system becoming more decentralized. It is becoming flat and it is becoming open. And the shifts of authority away from incumbent firms that used to do central planning and infrastructure towards new entrants, towards new customers that has got different expectations. And many of those entrants are making their own rules and making it very difficult for one to anticipate changes in the electricity system. The second most profound impact is the large-scale innovation from interactions that's taking place. The power market is seeing massive introduction of wind and solar, and even in our own country, without much impact to the total cost of the total system. And these include innovations in materials, in methods used in solar and wind generation, in the information that customers has got available and that grid managers has got available, and the changes in business models that is unleashed and then opens up new forms of capital. And this innovation is creating a very responsive sense of demand for demand, and also quite a set of work that is happening in around how do you store energy. Thirdly, the energy industry has tended to focus in the past on large size, capital-intensive investments. And that has always been the source of stability and therefore predictability. But these systems depend on continued investment. And it's very unlikely that firms will continue to deploy capital in the ways that they used to in the past. In the oil and gas industry, by example, it said that about $1 trillion of previously viable projects are all on hold because of the uncertainty on oil prices and the structure of the industry. And the power sector is facing very similar reluctance to make large, huge capital investments to upgrade, because the question is, who's all going to pay for the grid? Many of the sources of new ideas and technology, however, lies outside of the energy industry. New market designs and technologies such as distributed ledgers rose from the banking industry, including technologies such as blockchain. And these innovations does not allow much for efficient peer-to-peer transactions, and also makes it very difficult for governments to supervise and, for that matter, to generate tax revenues from the energy industry. Renewables have emerged in part from the work that has been done in the semiconductor industry, and similarly radical improvements in battery technology stems from advances in material science and the demand for power storage in computing. So these sources of innovation, most are in part far from outside of that we normally know. Those people that used to forecast and have the skill to forecast for the energy industry, they tend to be, within the old system, very less responsive to normal market forces of supply and demand. And the explosion of information and communication technologies are central to the large-scale changes that are taking place on their own and do not emerge in response to changes in energy prices. And one example of that is Tesla, that has absolutely become a leading disruptor in the electrical vehicle industry, a company that has got a huge market cap, but had yet not made any profits. So there's certainly a need for us to rely less on traditional methods, such as large-scale scenario analysis, to look at how we plan our energy systems. Energy firms, regulators, and policymakers need to improve their ability to reliably incorporate ideas and people from outside of the industry, given their experience. They also need to ensure that incubators are created for engaging with technology, that such supply of new ideas leads to how it impacts and grow traditional firms, and the traditional firms needs to become a lot more adept to adopting new technologies. The industry must address the reality that is around the social license to operate, particularly when we look at this transition. This transition must be a just transition. And the uncertainty that it's going to means that the future and the goals that we would set would not be one where everything just goes. Energy firms need to continue producing energy. They need to be on the front line of political and financial transition when new technologies are adopted. The business models for low carbon technologies needs to scale very quickly, and policy needs to support all of that happening. But the wholesale changes that is our experience in energy industry threatens to destroy many aspects of what we know. It will certainly see a shift in the allocation of labor, and these are some very real things that we will have to deal with. And the question would be, what do you do with the workers and the consumers? And that is most of the people in the world that are voters. How do you learn new skills? How would we find new employment? So the large-scale changes in the energy sector is likely to impact many countries, and particularly the Brics countries. It will impact their politics. It will potentially exacerbate the the sense of disenfranchisement of people and how people are currently feeling. Lastly, the future of the utility. Much of the talk about the new business models and technologies and power generation implies that traditional utilities will decline in their importance. Many of them and their revenue, specifically the revenue models, are exposed to a death spiral of flattened demand and generation shifts to decentralized units and decentralized grids. That might be true, but utilities might prove even more indispensable as stewards of the future intelligent wire systems that interconnect and manage to help decentralized components. So the revolution in the energy system seems to be on the horizon, and in many ways, these potentially radical changes are just in time for societies that want to continue their economic development in a sustainable manner on a planet that will have 30% more people and with a global GDP 3 times the current levels by 2050. So this tsunami of the energy transition, whether it's technology, whether it is what is happening in oil and gas, this tsunami brings hope, but it also generates fear and uncertainty. And it's for us as energy professionals and leaders to make sure that we direct this transition and ensure that we have tangible levels of investment, appropriate investment in many of our countries. As far as the Brics and Energy and Green Economy Work Group is concerned, we have been engaging as countries around 4 specific aspects. The first is how do we engage with the new development bank in putting together a clean energy fund. A clean energy fund that would provide access for investment in clean energy, particularly by the private sector, not just state-owned companies and state organizations. An investment that will ensure that the funding is provided in local currencies and making sure that the new development bank do not operate in the same manner than what we've seen many other multilaterals are operating. And we've had extensive discussions with them, and the future work will include a framework that we will develop between the work group and the new development bank to provide access to funding for all of our energy projects in the Brics countries. The second aspect was around providing a framework for an energy portal. One of the things that both, I know Pedro and I are quite passionate about is many of us don't know and understand the energy sectors in each of these countries. There's some significant work happening in India, some excellent work happening in China, some great work happening in Russia, and the same applies for Brazil and the same applies for South Africa. And we needed to share that so that we can understand the opportunities for investment in each other's energy markets. And we all have very unique capabilities. There's very unique capabilities about the Russians and the work they've done on energy efficiency and the work they've done as one of the largest oil and gas producers in the world. Brazil have very unique capabilities around the use of biofuels, as well as particularly a skill in offshore drilling and very deep conditions for oil and gas. And the same applies for India and China. The Minister of India told me a week ago that they're planning to expand the energy system with 50,000 megawatts of renewable capacity for the next 5 years. The third aspect that we've been looking for is making specific policy recommendations around the energy customer of the future. And that really deals with the aspects of decentralization and how do you make sure that the countries and the utilities and the businesses, the energy businesses, start accommodating the needs of a future customer for the energy system. Lastly, the fourth focus area for us is to deal with regional integration and interconnectedness. And there's a huge amount of work happening between China and Russia, and similarly between China and India, and within Brazil, around how they connect different regions of the country. And that is the essence of what we're putting forward to the Brics Business Council and what will be put forward to the heads of state with some very clear recommendations as to how this can be done. So for us, what is important is that we're on the cusp of this energy transition. As BRICS countries, we are leading it. There are huge opportunities for South African companies to play a role in other BRICS countries, and similarly for us to form partnerships with BRICS countries and start doing BRICS energy projects, particularly on the South African continent. I'd like to thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to the rest of our discussions. Thank you.